We would like you all to take a moment to join me in thanking Factor for sponsoring today's episode. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. Head to factormeals.com/cold50 and use code COLD50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's factormeals.com/cold50 and the code is COLD50. Enjoy the show. November 6th, 2021. Orlando, Florida. 22-year-old Bryan Vladek Hasel shows up at a coffee shop he often frequents, but after police are called and Vladek is issued a trespass warning for a prior incident with a pocket knife, he walks off and vanishes without a trace. 9 days later, Vladek's father returns from a family trip and discovers that his son is missing and has left most of his personal belongings behind in their apartment. There is speculation that Vladek may have suffered some sort of mental health crisis and disappeared voluntarily, but no trace of him can be found. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host, Robin Warder, and today we're going to be exploring a fairly recent missing persons case, the 2021 disappearance of Bryan Vladek Hasel. This story is being covered at the request of Vladek's sister, Bethany Hasel, as I originally met her last year at CrimeCon 2023 in Orlando. Since this is the same city where Vladek was living when he disappeared, Bethany was asking numerous creators to circulate copies of his missing persons flyer at her booth on Podcast Row. I ran into Bethany again a few months ago at the True Crime Podcast Festival in Denver, where she participated in a panel session and continued to spread awareness about her brother's disappearance, so I promised to put together an episode about his case and cover it on The Trail Went Cold. Vladek Hasel was born in Russia before he and his biological sister were adopted by an American couple and brought over to the United States, and at the time he went missing, Vladek was living with his father, Steve Hasel. However, while Steve was away on a family trip, Vladek vanished after an incident at a coffee shop where a sheriff's officer issued him a trespass warning which permanently banned him from the establishment. Since his father did not return into the following week, Vladek's disappearance was not immediately noticed, so he was not officially reported missing until several days after he was last seen. While Vladek was unemployed at the time, he was described as being a very kind, generous person who took a great interest in helping the homeless. But unfortunately, Vladek was also showing signs of depression and a mental health crisis, and since he had seemingly become disillusioned with the concept of materialism, he may have decided to disappear voluntarily and live off the grid. Since less than 3 years have passed since Vladek went missing, and there is no direct evidence of foul play, this is one missing persons case in which it's possible that the victim is still alive somewhere, though his family is greatly concerned about the fact that he has never made any attempt to contact them. This is why they are working so diligently to get Vladek's story out there, as there's always the possibility he could be found safely. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content, as our Patreon page has nearly 80 exclusive bonus episodes in our archives, which are not available on a regular feed. So with all that out of the way, let us now explore the disappearance of Vladek Hasel. Our story begins in Florida in 2021, and our central figure is 22-year-old Vladek Hasel. Vladek was born in Russia and had a sister named Irina who was just over 6 years older than him, but the two siblings would be placed in an orphanage. In 2004, when Vladek was 5 years old and Irina was 12, they were both adopted by an American couple named Steve and Cheryl Hasel, who brought them over to the United States. At the time, the Hasels lived in the town of Inverness, Florida, and had a total of 6 other children, though by this point, their 3 oldest children, Amy, Carrie, and Jody, had already moved out. Their son Jonathan would soon leave to attend college, while their 2 youngest children, Bethany and Kristen, remained living at home when Vladek and Irina joined their family. Before the adoption took place, the Hasels received assistance from a Russian woman who lived in Inverness and had a daughter of her own that was around Irina's age. The Hasels would go over to her residence and communicate with Irina over the phone, and since she did not speak English yet, the Russian woman would function as their translator. And after the adoption was finalized, Vladek and Irina would frequently visit this woman's house so they could continue speaking in their native Russian while gradually learning how to speak English. Vladek turned out to be a very active and energetic child who got along well with everyone and loved playing sports. He eventually took on the American name Bryan, though his family still referred to him by his birth name, and he learned how to speak English so fluently that he wound up losing his accent and pretty much forgot how to speak Russian. But while Vladek was in middle school, Steve and Cheryl would separate and the couple eventually divorced. For a while, Vladek and Bethany lived with their mother, which allowed the 2 siblings to develop a particularly close relationship as Vladek spent a lot of time hanging out with Bethany and her friends. Vladek eventually decided to move in with his father in the town of Claremont, and after graduating high school in 2017, he relocated to Arlington, Texas to live with his half-sister Carrie. Vladek had always dreamed of enlisting in the United States Marine Corps, but if he remained in Florida, he would have to attend boot camp in South Carolina. But residing in Texas would allow him to enlist in California, which he preferred. Carrie was also pregnant at this time, and Vladek was present at the hospital when she gave birth to her first child. Since Carrie was a single mother, Vladek spent a year doing everything he could to help her out and worked a number of different jobs, such as a game attendant at Six Flags, security at AT&T Stadium, and for a garage door warehouse company. But in September of 2018, he traveled to San Diego, California in order to attend basic training for the Marines. After graduating from boot camp at the end of the year, Vladek remained in San Diego and was assigned a desk job, but he did not find the experience to be fulfilling since he wanted a more active role. In the summer of 2019, Vladek decided to seek a discharge, and since he had endured a lot of childhood trauma during his time at the orphanage in Russia, he claimed he could not adapt to his new routine because of too many negative memories. The Marines granted him a general discharge under honorable conditions, and the words "failure to adapt" were written on his paperwork. By this point, Steve Hasel had remarried, so Vladek returned to Florida in order to live with his father and stepmother in Winter Springs. In January of 2020, Vladek decided to relocate to Detroit, Michigan, and move back in with his sister Carrie, who was continuing to raise her young child as a single mother. Vladek was hired as an environmental services technician at a local hospital, and while he liked the job and seemed to be doing well, the COVID-19 pandemic soon turned the world completely upside down. Since COVID forced the closure of all daycares, Carrie had to take a leave of absence from her job in order to take care of her child, which meant that Vladek pretty much had to financially support all 3 of them. They all decided to move to the town of Nashua, New Hampshire, where Vladek found a new job, but he really didn't like it that much, and after being let go, he returned to Florida in order to move back in with his father and stepmother. However, there were a lot of issues in the marriage between Steve and his wife, who was frustrated by the fact that Vladek was unemployed and couldn't get a new job. So in September of 2020, Steve made the decision to separate from his wife and move out alongside Vladek, and the couple would later divorce. Steve and Vladek lived in various hotels for the next 2 months, but in November, they finally found an apartment at a building called the Place at Alafaya, located at 11600 McKay Boulevard in Orlando, near the University of Central Florida campus. Vladek was still unable to find employment or contribute to the household finances, and he seemed uncertain about what he wanted to do with his life. Over the course of the next year, Vladek appeared to sink into a depression and frequently spoke about a desire to go off and live in the woods. But since he did not want to leave his father alone or cause him to face any blame from the rest of their family if he took off, Vladek said he would not leave while Steve was alive. By 2021, Vladek's family noticed that he started to become disillusioned by the concept of materialism and seemed inclined to live a minimalist lifestyle. For instance, Vladek always slept on an air mattress at his apartment, even though his father offered to purchase a bed for him. At one point, Steve did convince Vladek to get a mattress in a box, but he never got around to opening it. Vladek also developed a serious interest in religion and reading the Bible, as he spent a lot of time in the prayer garden of a local Catholic church. He also made comments like, quote, "What is the point if we can just be in heaven?" which did cause some concern among his loved ones. However, Vladek seemed to develop a new passion for helping others. Whenever he and his father went out to eat at restaurants together, Vladek liked to start up conversations with the servers, and if he heard they were struggling, he would leave them generous tips of a couple $100s. Vladek also started to spend much of his spare time interacting with the homeless population, as he would befriend them and engage in lengthy conversations and take them out to lunch and the movies. Since this seemed to give Vladek a new purpose in his life, his father supported his new endeavor and did not object if he gave Vladek money, which was subsequently given away to someone else. When fall rolled around, Vladek decided to give away his tablet to Bethany, and he also broke his smartphone, telling his father it was a quote-unquote distraction and that he had no desire to replace it. Steve tried to convince Vladek to at least get a flip phone for himself in case of an emergency, and while Vladek relented, he did not always carry his flip phone around with him whenever he went out. Steve owned a car, which was often borrowed and driven by Vladek, but on November the 3rd, it wound up breaking down at Waterford Lakes Plaza. Vladek was forced to walk home, and the car would be towed to a repair shop the following day. Later that evening, Vladek started making strange comments to his father about archangels and demons and how you, quote-unquote, have to be dark to kill the dark. He had developed an interest in a pastor with a YouTube channel, and while Vladek may have learned about these topics from watching these videos, his family did not know the pastor's name. Regardless, Steve expressed some concerns about Vladek's behavior during a phone conversation with his daughter Jody. While Jody suggested performing a wellness check for Vladek, Steve ultimately decided against it, as he felt that Vladek would be able to downplay his behavior and give off the impression that nothing was wrong. Well, the following day, on November the 5th, Steve planned to travel to Tennessee in order to meet up with Bethany, her mother, and some of her friends, so they could all celebrate Bethany's birthday. The trip was going to last a week and a half, and Vladek was invited to come along. Vladek had always expressed a desire to hike the Appalachian Trail, and at one point, Steve considered renting a 4-bedroom house in Orlando where he, Vladek, Bethany, and Jody could all stay. But the idea was abandoned when Vladek said he didn't need a room and would just camp outside to prepare himself to hike the trail. A couple months before the trip, Vladek brought up the possibility of performing the hike and meeting his family in Tennessee after he completed it, but Bethany would later say that she believed this seemed more like a pipe dream and Vladek had no intention of actually following through with it. A couple days before his father left, Vladek ultimately decided to stay behind in Orlando while his family took their trip. Steve gave Vladek $100 in cash and a credit card and offered to purchase more groceries for him before he left, but Vladek felt there was already enough food in the apartment to last him for the next week and a half. Their car was still in the repair shop and could not be picked up until Steve returned to Orlando, but Vladek did not mind, as he said he would just spend the week walking because he was comfortable with walking to places he would frequent. Steve also informed Vladek that he was expecting a package while he was out of town, and Vladek agreed to bring it inside the apartment for him when it arrived. Well, Steve left for Tennessee at around 6 p.m. on the 5th, and at 1:59 a.m. on the morning of November the 6th, Vladek decided to call up his sister Irina, and they had a 6-minute conversation. It was not unusual for the two siblings to chat on the phone at odd hours, and Irina would later say that she did not notice anything out of the ordinary with Vladek, and he never indicated that he was planning to go anywhere. But this would turn out to be the last time that anyone from Vladek's family ever heard from him. Over the course of the next 9 days, A number of calls and texts were sent to Vladek's cell phone, which went unanswered, and he never attempted to communicate with anyone. Since Vladek's family were in the mountains of Tennessee, which had very spotty cell phone service, they were initially not all that concerned, as they wondered if their texts to Vladek just weren't going through. Steve finally returned to Orlando on November the 15th, and after picking up his car at the repair shop, he arrived at his apartment at around 4 p.m. Steve was surprised to discover that the package he had been expecting was still outside the front door, and it turned out that it had been delivered 1 week earlier on November the 8th. When Steve went inside his apartment, there was no sign of Vladek, but he noticed there were no dirty dishes in the sink, and it did not appear that most of the food and drinks in the fridge had been consumed. While Vladek's wallet, debit card, and credit card were gone, most of his other personal possessions had been left behind, including his gym shoes and a $60 pocket knife he had recently purchased. Vladek's flip phone was also inside his bedroom, but even though it was resting next to its charger cord, the phone had not actually been charged and the battery was dead. Since Steve had originally told Vladek he was planning to come back on the evening of November the 16th and wound up arriving 1 day early, he was not overly concerned by Vladek's absence and figured he would return shortly. But when Vladek failed to resurface by the 17th, Steve informed Bethany about what was going on. It was very uncharacteristic for Vladek to go several days without contacting anyone in his family, particularly Irina, who had also not heard from him. So Bethany decided to contact the Orange County Sheriff's Office in order to officially report Vladek missing. Steve and Bethany would start posting and circulating missing persons flyers throughout the area, which featured Vladek's photograph and Steve's cell phone number. Steve soon received a voicemail from a maintenance worker at his apartment complex, the place at Alafaya, who saw Vladek's flyer and provided some information which Steve subsequently shared with the sheriff's office. According to Steve, the maintenance worker said that sometime on Friday, November the 12th, he bumped into Vladek near the apartment complex's basketball court and chatted with him for about 5 minutes before Vladek walked into a nearby wooded area. Now, Vladek did have a history of walking around the complex and chatting with the maintenance workers, but there was some question about the validity of this date. As you recall, a package was delivered to Steve and left outside his front door on November the 8th, and his apartment was located only about 50 feet away from the basketball court. So if Vladek had been at the apartment complex on the 12th, why did he not bring the package inside? Well, since Steve was hard of hearing, it became apparent that he may have misheard or misinterpreted some of the details on the maintenance worker's voicemail. It turned out that the worker never mentioned any specific dates and simply said he saw Vladek, quote-unquote, last Friday. Steve believed he meant Friday, November the 12th, when the worker may have actually seen Vladek on Friday, November the 5th. When Bethany listened to the voicemail, she realized that the worker never actually said that he saw Vladek go into the woods behind the basketball court, as he only said that Vladek liked to hang out in those woods in order to do things like smoke or sing, so the worker suggested they check that area. Unfortunately, since Steve had already shared this incorrect detail with law enforcement, a lot of the original missing persons flyers and media coverage stated that Vladek was last seen walking into the woods, and it took several months for his family to get this corrected. Bethany asked the managers of the apartment complex if they had any surveillance footage which might help them track Vladek's movements, but she was informed that the only security cameras were inside the gym and the laundry room, and this footage was only preserved for 7 days before it was erased. Regardless, management said they would review the footage to see if they could find any trace of Vladek, but would only turn it over to the Orange County Sheriff's Office if they requested it. Bethany shared this information with the sheriff's office, but when she followed up with the lead detective on Vladek's case 1 week later, the detective said she hadn't got around to requesting the footage. Steve and Bethany attempted to perform a search of the aforementioned wooded area located behind the basketball court, but while the woods were not particularly large, they proved to be so dense and overgrown that Steve and Bethany were unable to make it any further than 30 feet. On November the 19th, the sheriff's office started performing their own search of the wooded area and ran into the same issue, but they eventually started using helicopters, thermal infrared heat drones, and a canine search dog to look through the woods. While they found no trace of Vladek, they did find a single red slide shoe near the tree line. When a photograph of this shoe was shown to Steve, he confirmed that Vladek did own slide shoes, but did not recall him having a red pair. Regardless, the shoe was sent out for DNA testing. A door-to-door canvass was performed of the place at Alafaya, and investigators spoke to a neighbor who was a friend of Vladek's and claimed that at around 3 a.m. on November the 15th, Vladek had shown up at his apartment. Vladek asked if he could stay the night, but this person said he couldn't invite him inside because his girlfriend and her kids were there. Vladek then asked this guy if he had a gun, and when asked what he needed it for, Vladek said it was for protection against an animal. Since the resident had a prior criminal record and couldn't legally own a firearm, he told Vladek he didn't have one. Vladek then made a remark about how he wanted to, quote-unquote, go off the grid before they parted ways. Since this alleged encounter took place several days after Vladek was last confirmed to be alive, it has never been officially verified, and it's possible that even if the neighbor is telling the truth, he could have been mistaken about the date. Vladek's flip phone showed no activity on it following his 1:59 a.m. phone call with Irina on November the 6th. Later that same day, at 12:01 p.m., Vladek received a text on his phone, but it was marked as unread, as were the rest of the texts which were sent to his phone over the course of the next several days. Vladek continued to remain missing, and in December, Bethany and Jody created a Facebook group to help bring awareness to their brother's disappearance. At one point, Jody posted that Vladek was obsessive about washing his hands, and since the weather had become colder, she believed that Vladek would have wanted a shower and sought shelter. Indeed, Vladek hated to be dirty and would usually take at least 2 showers per day, and he was also afraid of the dark. Vladek's 23rd birthday wound up taking place on December the 20th, but he still never resurfaced, and the Orange County Sheriff's Office declined to do interviews with the media about his case. When 2022 rolled around, the Hasel family was approached by the non-profit search organization Night Owl Reconnaissance, who offered to assist with their attempts to find Vladek. Since Vladek was a frequent gamer and had a PlayStation account, Night Owl Reconnaissance performed a data review on his PlayStation console. They wanted to see if Vladek may have communicated with anyone during his gaming and shared information that could shed light on what happened to him, but they were unable to gain access to his account. You might recall that Vladek had previously owned a smartphone which broke 3 months before he went missing. While Bethany asked one of the detectives if records from the smartphone could be requested, she was told they could not without a warrant, which they were unable to get, since there was not yet any evidence of foul play or criminal activity. Vladek also had Facebook and Instagram accounts, and even though it was quite some time before he posted anything on these accounts, he did sometimes use them for private messaging. But once again, Vladek's family were unable to gain access to his messages to see if he shared anything that might be relevant to his disappearance. Bethany and Steve spent a lot of time canvassing the area around University Boulevard where Vladek was known to frequent. They encountered a number of people who remembered Vladek, as he was known for his generosity and support for local businesses, but no one could offer any insight about what happened to him. On February the 24th, the sheriff's office met with the Hasels and returned Vladek's flip phone to them, as well as a laptop that Vladek and Steve had shared. When the Hasels asked the lead detective if she had spoken with any of the people listed in Vladek's phone, her reply was, quote, "No, we thought you did." The sheriff's office also said that they never searched through the laptop since they were unable to turn it on, as they were unaware that it could not be turned on unless it was plugged into an outlet because it was so old. The Hasels also asked if the sheriff's office could obtain surveillance footage from all the street cameras and stores in the University Boulevard area, as well as the restaurants Vladek was known to frequent, but were informed that it was too much footage to go through, and the street cameras in that area were not even working properly. However, it was during this meeting that the Hasels were informed that Vladek had received a trespass warning at the Foxtail Coffee Company, which was located on University Boulevard and Collegiate Way, about a mile from his apartment. This meant that Vladek would be permanently banned from the establishment, and when Bethany asked the lead detective why Vladek was issued a trespass warning, she replied, quote, "Oh, you know your brother, he was probably talking too much," end quote. The Hasels decided to reach out to the Foxtail Coffee Company in order to learn more information about Vladek and his trespass warning, and on April the 9th, the manager finally agreed to meet with them and share the whole story. They learned that Vladek had been a regular customer at the shop for about a year, and the staff knew him as Bryan. He visited the shop about 3 times per week, and he would sometimes remain there for hours at a time, pacing around and listening to music on his headphones. In fact, there were occasions when Vladek would loudly sing along with the music and prompt other customers to become nervous and complain to the staff about his behavior. But whenever the staff asked Vladek to sit down or lower the volume, he always complied without issue. The manager said that during his own interactions with Vladek, he got the impression he was struggling and that Vladek had told him he was sleep deprived. Well, it turned out that around 8 p.m. on the evening of November the 4th, Vladek had visited Foxtail and purchased a drink and sat down, but at some point, another customer complained to staff that Vladek was making him uncomfortable and he felt compelled to leave. Shortly thereafter, the customer returned and informed the staff that Vladek was now sitting outside, and the reason he became concerned about him was because he had seen Vladek pull out a pocket knife and place it on the table the last time he was there. I briefly mentioned this pocket knife a bit earlier, as Vladek had paid $60 to purchase it on November the 3rd, and when his father asked him why he got it, he simply said it was for protection. Even though none of the staff at Foxtail personally witnessed Vladek pull out the knife, and there was no surveillance footage of this, the company had a corporate zero-tolerance policy when it came to bringing weapons into their establishments. So the staff decided to call the Orange County Sheriff's Office and ask them to issue a trespass warning for Vladek, but by the time they arrived that night, Vladek was gone. However, 2 days later, at around 8 a.m. on November the 6th, about 6 hours after his final phone conversation with Irina, Vladek returned to the Foxtail Coffee Company and used his credit card to purchase coffee. The staff then proceeded to contact the sheriff's office again and asked them to issue a trespass warning to Vladek. A sheriff's officer soon arrived and asked Vladek to join him outside, where he informed him that the shop had made the decision to have him permanently trespassed, so he was now banned from the establishment and being asked to leave. Vladek seemed confused about the situation and asked why he was banned, but the officer only told him that since the shop was a private business, they had the right to trespass him for any reason. He asked Vladek to empty his pockets, and the only items he was carrying at the time were his identification, his Bank of America debit card, and the credit card Steve had left him. While the officer asked Vladek for his phone number, he replied that since he had just recently gotten a new phone, he could not recall the number. For reasons unknown, no one informed Vladek about the incident with the pocket knife from 2 days earlier. He was not carrying the knife when he emptied his pockets for the officer, and it would later be found in his apartment. In spite of Vladek's confusion, he did not put up any resistance, and the trespass warning was officially issued at 8:26 a.m. The whole incident was documented by the officer's body cam, and when Vladek left, he was last seen heading west towards a nearby Wawa convenience store. Officially, this is considered to be the last time that Vladek was confirmed to be alive. The manager also told the Hasels that on February the 12th or the 13th, a family notified the staff at Foxtail that they had seen a barefoot man near the shop's dumpster who was dressed in a white top and light-colored pants. He was talking to himself in an animated fashion and may have been experiencing a manic episode and was last seen heading towards the Wawa convenience store. The Orange County Sheriff's Office were called about the incident, but the man was never found, and while it was tempting to think that he could have been Vladek, the manager told the Hasels that he did not believe this was the case, since the staff was very familiar with him. The managers provided the Hasels with a still image, which had been taken of Vladek by their security cameras on the morning of November the 6th. In this image, as well as the officer's body cam footage, Vladek was wearing a black hoodie over a gray shirt and a necklace, as well as khaki shorts and crew-length black socks, but most interestingly, he was wearing a pair of red-colored slide shoes which seemed similar to the red shoe found in the woods behind his apartment complex. However, it could not be established if that particular shoe belonged to Vladek, as the results of the DNA testing on it turned out to be inconclusive. Bethany later reached out to the lead detective to ask if she could see a picture of the red slide shoe that was found in the wooded area, but her request was denied. Bethany then asked if the detective could at least tell her if this shoe was the same size as Vladek's, so the detective inquired about Vladek's shoe size and asked Bethany to send over the still image from Foxtail. Around the same time period, billboards asking for information about Vladek's disappearance were finally put up by his family. Jody was also contacted by an acquaintance of Vladek's who worked for a local restaurant called the Smoky Bones Bar and Fire Grill. Vladek met him about 6 months before he went missing, and they often chatted whenever Vladek visited the establishment. Well, at 7:13 p.m. on November the 4th, Vladek called this guy and asked if he could crash for a night or two on his couch, but he said no because he didn't feel comfortable with the arrangement. During previous conversations, Vladek had spoken to this man about the Bible and how he wanted to go on a pilgrimage to preach about his teachings, but now said that he had a change of heart and wanted to sing instead. But unfortunately, the acquaintance was unable to offer much insight into what happened to Vladek. The sheriff's office soon received some tips about potential sightings of Vladek at a 7-Eleven convenience store and a homeless encampment in Orange County, but these leads never went anywhere. During the summer, the search organization, Community United Effort, performed another in-depth search of the wooded area behind the place at Alafaya, which involved around 30 search dogs, but they once again found nothing. Friends of the Hasel family put in a public records request to the Orange County Sheriff's Office to see the body cam footage of Vladek being issued the trespass warning, and after they received the footage, it was shown to the Hasels. As far as anyone could tell, Vladek did not have any contacts in his native Russia since his adoption had been a closed one, and while he had expressed an interest in going back there someday, his passport had expired, though investigators did arrange things so that if Vladek ever attempted to get a new passport, it would be flagged. The Hasels also hired a private investigator named Steve Fisher, who would turn up an interesting lead. In the months prior to his disappearance, Vladek had lent his credit card to a homeless couple and told them they could use it to buy whatever they wanted. But this couple attempted to take advantage of Vladek and called him over 40 times on his smartphone before the device was broken. There was no record of them ever having attempted to call his flip phone, so Vladek likely never gave them his new number and cut off all contact with them. But Fisher revealed that the couple had what he described as quote-unquote very dangerous backgrounds and a prior criminal history. In September of 2022, Steve was in the midst of moving into a new rental home with Bethany and Jody when Hurricane Ian hit Orlando and caused Steve's apartment to be flooded with 3 feet of water. Since Steve had not yet moved Vladek's personal belongings out of there, most of them were destroyed, and all that survived were Vladek's personal Bible, childhood passport, and a few items of clothing. Due to the flooding, the place at Alafaya terminated their leases with all of their tenants, forcing them to find new housing, and the complex is now deserted and slated for demolition. Around the 1-year anniversary of Vladek's disappearance, new detectives were assigned to his case, and Bethany received a tip from someone who supposedly saw Vladek talking to an older homeless person at the Wawa convenience store at around 8:30 or 9 a.m. on November the 6th, shortly after he received the trespass warning at Foxtail. But unfortunately, it does not appear that this lead has brought the case any closer to a resolution, and after nearly 3 years, Vladek Hasel continues to remain a missing person. So I guess you could say the trail went cold. But before we continue, we would like to take a few moments to thank our sponsor, Factor. So I guess the big thing you're all wondering right now is, what happened to summertime? Well, we've now entered the month of September and everything just seems busier, but if you don't have a lot of extra time for cooking, we thankfully have a solution for that. Factor's no prep, no mess meals. I mean, I think you're just going to love how many options you'll have for their chef-crafted meals, which include Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, so no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. You're going to enjoy the effortless support you'll receive for your lifestyle, as you have the option to choose from no less than 6 menu preferences, which can help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat as well balanced as possible. You can even treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. I've previously discussed some of the meals I've liked, and another person I know who recently received a box of vegetarian factor meals also greatly enjoyed them. One of their favorites was the hearty beef chili and macaroni meal, which was topped with roasted zucchini, corn, and toasted garlic butter, as well as the vegetarian tamale bowl topped with spiced sweet potatoes and pickled jalapeno crema. These meals were also exceptionally easy to prepare, and they did not have to utter the dreaded phrase, "The meal went cold." So head to factormeals.com/cold50 and use code cold50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. That's factormeals.com/cold50, and the code is cold50 for 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the episode. Anyway, ever since Vladek went missing, his family has reached out to a number of true crime podcasters and creators requesting that they cover his disappearance. Thus far, his story has been featured on such shows as Mums and Mysteries, Navigating Advocacy, Paradise After Dark, Missing Persons, Detective Perspective, and Misty Mysteries, as well as John Lauren's YouTube series, Brain Scratch. At the time of this episode's release, Vladek has been missing for nearly 3 years, but there is a bit more urgency surrounding his disappearance than many of the others I've covered, since there is a decent chance that Vladek could still be alive somewhere. I know that his loved ones have feared the worst, since Vladek always kept in touch with his family, particularly his biological sister Irina, whom he used to speak with on an almost daily basis. While Vladek had previously expressed a desire to go off the grid and possibly live in the woods somewhere, he said he would never do this while his father was still alive and cause him all this painful grief. However, Vladek's lack of communication does not necessarily mean that he is deceased, as he very well could have suffered some sort of mental breakdown which caused him to forget who he is, and he may be wandering around out there somewhere as a transient with no memory of his family or in his past life. That's why it's been incredibly important to circulate flyers featuring Vladek's photograph, because there may be people who have encountered him during these past 3 years, but were not even aware he was a missing person. Vladek's loved ones have described him as one of the nicest, kindest, and most generous human beings you'd ever want to meet, and even if he was feeling down on himself, he still had a big passion for helping others. They said that if you ever made eye contact with him, he would immediately start a conversation with you and take a genuine interest in anything you said, no matter if you were a complete stranger. I've actually watched the body cam footage where Vladek was issued the trespass warning at the Foxtail Coffee Company, and even in that situation, Vladek still took some time to make small talk with the officer and ask him how his day was going. It sounds like Vladek had been going through some sort of existential crisis, as his big dream growing up was to join the Marines, but even though he managed to graduate basic training, the whole experience turned out to be not what he was expecting, and he was quite disappointed to receive a desk job. After he received his discharge, it wasn't long before the pandemic hit and made it extra difficult for Vladek to secure a steady employment, so I think he was unsure about what he wanted to do with the rest of his life and was trying to find a purpose. Vladek also became very disenchanted with the concept of materialism, and I can actually see a number of parallels between his story and the 1989 disappearance of Adam Hecht, which I covered last year on episode number 332 of this podcast. As you recall, Adam Hecht hailed from a wealthy Beverly Hills family, but grew very disillusioned with his lifestyle, and much like Vladek, he developed a fascination with the homeless population and started to devote a large chunk of his time to interacting with homeless individuals and helping them out. It's now been 35 years since Adam went missing, and there is still no evidence to indicate what happened to him, but he may have just decided to start living a transient lifestyle and could still be out there somewhere. And for all we know, perhaps the same thing happened with Vladek. His family has stated that Vladek was not someone who was into the party scene and showed little interest in drugs or alcohol, and that the most he had ever tried was weed. Even though there have been a couple of reported sightings of Vladek after November 6, 2021, none of them have been officially verified, so the last time we can be absolutely certain that he was alive was right before 8:30 a.m. on the morning of the 6th, since there is body cam footage of him. At that point, Vladek's family was in Tennessee celebrating Bethany's birthday, but while he declined to go with them, he also did not give off any obvious warning signs that he was planning to go elsewhere either. But before Steve Hasel left on the trip, he had spoken to his daughter Jody about the possibility of performing a wellness check on Vladek, so there were definitely concerns about his behavior. I do think that the trespass warning at Foxtail may have been some sort of breaking point for Vladek, as he spent a lot of time hanging out there and seemed to consider the spot to be a safe haven for him. But the circumstances of what happened here are definitely a bit odd. As you recall, the trespass warning came about because of an incident from 2 days earlier where Vladek supposedly pulled out his pocket knife and placed it on the table, which made another customer uncomfortable and compelled him to complain to staff. A decision was then made to have Vladek permanently banned from the establishment, so when he returned on the morning of the 6th, the sheriff's office were called to issue a trespass warning. Well, I don't know about you, but as someone who worked in retail for many years and witnessed much worse incidents with customers, issuing a permanent ban seems like a major overreaction to me. I know that the company had a zero-tolerance policy when it came to weapons, but it's not like Vladek pulled out a gun and just started waving it around and threatening people. He supposedly did nothing more than place a knife on the table, and we really only have this one customer's word that he did this. While I don't necessarily believe the customer was lying, it seems strange that his word alone would cause things to escalate to a trespass warning, particularly since Vladek was a regular customer. During his meeting with the Hasel family, the Foxtail manager told them that company procedure dictated that in order to trespass someone for a weapons issue, the customer must be present when they make that decision, and staff must view the weapon on the customer, but that's not what happened with Vladek. To be fair, they originally called the sheriff's office about this on the evening of the 4th, but Vladek was gone by the time they arrived. However, it kinda rubs me the wrong way that when Vladek returned on the 6th, they still took his money and allowed him to purchase a coffee before they called the sheriff's office again. Vladek was not even carrying his pocket knife this time around, and I don't know why no one bothered to explain the situation to him from 2 nights earlier. I'm guessing that Vladek didn't even know about the zero-tolerance policy on weapons, so if he wasn't bothering or harming anybody, why not just give him a warning and tell him not to bring the knife into the establishment again? When you watch the body cam footage, Vladek is very polite and respectful with the sheriff's officer, and the only time he gets visibly angry and frustrated is when he questions why he's receiving a trespass warning when none of the employees have even told him what he did wrong. Now, we know that Vladek would sometimes hang out at Foxtail for hours at a time and do stuff like pacing around while loudly singing along with the music on his headphones, but if this bothered any of the customers and the staff asked Vladek to keep it down, he always complied without causing any trouble. This does make me wonder if someone on the staff just did not like having Vladek around there, so this alleged incident with the pocket knife finally gave them the excuse they needed to have him banned, even though it was for something relatively minor. Obviously, the employees could not have predicted that Vladek would go missing, so you can't hold them directly responsible for his disappearance, but since this turned out to be the last time that Vladek was confirmed to be alive, the whole situation has wound up taking on a greater significance. If you watch the body cam footage, Vladek seems legitimately confused about why he was being trespassed, and while he tried to handle it as best he could, his family has said that you can clearly see some pain and hurt in his eyes. So the obvious question is, was this incident some sort of breaking point for Vladek that compelled him to disappear of his own volition? We know that Vladek was last seen walking in the direction of the Wawa convenience store shortly before 8:30 a.m., but no one can confirm that he ever returned to his apartment at any point. When Vladek emptied his pockets for the officer, he was carrying his identification, debit card, and his father's credit card, which just happened to be the only items missing from the apartment, whereas items like his pocket knife, gym shoes, and cell phone were still there. At around 12:01 p.m., Vladek received a text on his phone which was never read, so this seems to suggest that something might have happened to him during that 3.5-hour window. But of course, what complicates things is that we have at least 2 reported sightings of Vladek at the place of Alafaya after November the 6th. The maintenance worker who claimed that he conversed with Vladek near the basketball court on the 12th, and the neighbor who said that Vladek stopped by his apartment at around 3 a.m. on the 15th. I do think it's likely that the maintenance worker actually saw Vladek on November the 5th, the day before he went missing, and there was simply a misinterpretation of the date, since the worker said the encounter took place, quote-unquote, last Friday during his voicemail message. I also previously discussed how there was a miscommunication about Vladek entering the woods behind the apartment complex basketball court after he spoke to the worker, as he actually just said that Vladek liked to hang out in those woods. But even if Vladek didn't enter the woods on the 12th, that doesn't necessarily mean he did go in there at some point around the time he disappeared. I know that multiple searches failed to find any trace of Vladek in the woods, but they did uncover a single red slide shoe which seemed to match the shoes he was wearing in the body cam footage, though it has never been conclusively established if it belonged to him. But if the shoe was Vladek's, that would be a source of concern, because why would he leave it there without retrieving it? Did he continue to walk around with only one shoe on? This could suggest that Vladek was forcibly abducted from that spot, or his remains are in the woods and have just been missed during the search efforts. Of course, the biggest complication is the account from Vladek's neighbor at the apartment complex, who claimed that Vladek paid him a visit at 3 a.m. on November the 15th. Looking back over the timeline, Vladek's family left for Tennessee on November the 5th, Vladek was last confirmed to be alive on the morning of the 6th, and Steve Hasel returned home on the late afternoon of the 15th. When the Hasels were in Tennessee, Vladek did not respond to repeated calls or texts from them, and there's no activity on his cell phone after the 6th. We also know that Steve's package was delivered to his front door on the 8th, but Vladek never brought it inside the apartment. I mean, I suppose we can't discount the possibility that Vladek didn't retrieve the package out of sheer laziness, but Steve also noticed that virtually none of the food or drinks in the refrigerator appeared to have been eaten during his absence. It seems very unlikely that Vladek spent an entire week in his apartment and there was no activity on his debit card or credit cards after the 6th, so if Vladek did visit his neighbor on the 15th, where was he during that 9-day window and what was he doing? If the neighbor is telling the truth, then the most logical explanation is that he was mistaken about the date, and if you look at the timeline, it would make more sense if Vladek stopped by during the early morning hours of November the 5th rather than the 15th. As you might recall, on the evening of November the 4th, Vladek called an acquaintance who worked at the Smoky Bones Bar and Fire Grill and asked if he could crash for a night or two on his couch, but the guy said no. So that could provide an explanation for why Vladek might feel compelled to visit his neighbor hours later at 3 a.m. on the 5th in order to ask if he could stay there. But if this is what happened, that still doesn't explain why Vladek would be asking both these people for a place to stay to begin with. We know that Steve left for Tennessee at 6 p.m. on the 5th, so Vladek would have had the apartment to himself for the next week and a half. Did he just want to spend some time crashing with other people because he felt he might get lonely? No matter what date this took place, it is still incredibly odd that Vladek would be dropping by his neighbor's apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the other concerning element is that he asked this guy if he had a gun. He made a remark about how he wanted to, quote-unquote, go off the grid and needed the gun as protection against an animal, so perhaps this encounter took place sometime after Vladek received the trespass warning and he just decided he had enough and wanted to leave. We really can't know what was going on inside his head at that particular point. Of course, the detail about the gun could point to the disturbing possibility of Vladek being suicidal and planning to go off into some remote area to end his own life. He did often speak about wanting to go to heaven, which caused a bit of concern with his family, but it should reiterate that we have no idea if Vladek ever did acquire a gun at any point, and this whole suicide scenario is nothing but pure speculation. But what about the possibility that Vladek became the victim of foul play? Well, there's no evidence to support this theory either, but if he disappeared on his own and started living some sort of transient lifestyle, he could have eventually crossed paths with someone who did him harm. Vladek was known for his generosity and desire to help others, but in the months prior to his disappearance, he did lend his credit card to a homeless couple who wound up taking advantage of him and frequently called his smartphone. It appears that Vladek may have broken off all contact with this couple after his smartphone was destroyed, but they were described as having dangerous backgrounds and a criminal history. Their identities have never been released publicly, and it sounds like law enforcement has had a hard time tracking them down because of their transient lifestyles, but we really don't know if they have any connection to Vladek's disappearance. The big issue with getting a handle on what may have happened to Vladek is that we have such a large window of time between when he was last confirmed to be alive and when he was noticed to be missing. The fact of the matter is that we're dealing with someone who seemed to become disillusioned with mainstream society and had spent a great deal of time struggling with depression and trying to figure out their purpose in life. When a person develops that mindset, their actions can be very unpredictable, so the possibilities of what happened to him are endless. From what I can tell, the morning where Vladek was last confirmed to be alive seemed to start out as an average routine day for him, but perhaps after he received the trespass warning, something inside him just snapped, and he made the decision to walk away. If Vladek is still alive, another possibility is that he left the state of Florida and traveled elsewhere, which might explain why no one has found him. After all, he has previously lived in such states as Texas, California, Michigan, and New Hampshire. Perhaps he had some sort of mental health crisis which caused him to lose his memory, and he is still out there somewhere with no idea who he is. Or maybe Vladek just simply planned to walk from Foxtail back to his apartment, but he wound up crossing paths with someone who harmed him. Until we have any solid evidence which points in a specific direction, this is all just speculation. During one interview, Bethany shared this quote which perfectly summarizes the painful ambiguity surrounding Vladek's disappearance. Quote, "And if he is out there okay, doing his own thing, that's great. That's all we need to know. But in my heart of hearts, something is wrong. Vladek has never been without contact with his family. He would let Irina, his biological sibling, worry for 2 years. And he definitely doesn't like the spotlight on him. It's like pulling teeth to get him in pictures. If he had seen any of the coverage that he's had, he would have reached out to someone and be like, I'm good, just doing my own thing. But there's been nothing, so something's not right. And I really worry about the potential of someone taking advantage of him or he's afraid of somebody. Something is not right." End quote. Whatever the case, I'm glad that Vladek's photograph is being widely circulated by his family, since there's a chance that someone somewhere might recognize his face and be able to shed some light on what happened to him. Like Bethany said, if Vladek is still alive, he doesn't necessarily have to reunite with his family, but they still need to know he's okay. So to recap, Bryan Vladek Hasel is a white, 5'8" male who weighs approximately 220 pounds. He has blondish brown hair and blue eyes, and was last seen wearing a black hoodie over a gray shirt with a necklace, khaki shorts, bright red slide shoes, and crew-length black socks. I also previously mentioned that even though Vladek was born in Russia, he completely lost his accent after living in the United States. So if you happen to have any information about his disappearance, please contact the Orange County Sheriff's Office at 407-254-7000. That's 407-254-7000. His case number is 21-83864. That's 21-83864. Or you can reach out to the family directly at findbryanvladekhassel@gmail.com. That's findbryanvladekhassel@gmail.com. Also, if you want to learn more information about Vladek and view photographs of him, please visit the website which has been started by his family at findvladekhassel.wixsite.com/find-Vladek. The link to this website can be found in our show notes. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now, the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Over the past 6 years, our Patreon page has released nearly 80 exclusive bonus episodes, which are all currently available in our archives for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3. This past month, I released a bonus episode about a very odd story from Unsolved Mysteries involving a young mute woman named Lucy, who was discovered to be wandering the streets of California in 1992 with no information about who she was, and as far as I can tell, she was never identified. I've also dropped an exclusive bonus episode from my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and my two co-hosts, Jules and Ashley, cover an unsolved cold case from Massachusetts, the 1995 murder of Deanna Kremen. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I recorded another new audio commentary track which could be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and we now have over 60 of these commentary tracks in our archives. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our most recent listeners who have signed up with us on Patreon this week, and they are Dave H. and Olive. Thank you so much for your support. I wanted to remind everyone that in just over 1 month from now, The Trail Went Cold will be appearing at the Berkshire Podcast Festival, which is taking place in North Adams, Massachusetts from October the 18th to the 20th. It's being organized by Josh Hallmark of the True Crime Bullshit podcast and will feature a number of high-profile shows, including yours truly. If you would like to purchase tickets, please visit their website at berkshirepodcastfestival.com and use our specialized promo code COLD2024 to get a 35% discount on tickets. That's berkshirepodcastfestival.com and use the promo code COLD2024 to get a 35% discount. I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Anyway, I'm going to be traveling to London for CrimeCon UK next weekend, which means that, per tradition, I'll be covering a highly requested case from London on our next episode. So have yourselves a great week and join us next Wednesday for a special British-themed episode of The Trail Went Cold.